Hey all, my name is Jamie Potter. I have a PhD in organizational behavior from the Wharton School of Business. And one of my greatest passions in the world, actually the reason I pursued a PhD in the first place, is I just absolutely love making people happy at work. I think the world would be such a fantastic place if more people enjoyed their job. Unfortunately, we find that over 80% of people are disengaged at work. And I found myself for years before the PhD just reading about these topics, downloading journal articles from Google Scholar to understand why this was and how it could be fixed. And that passion led me to getting a PhD. And what it's leading me to now is I am hoping to, from my experience in my PhD program, from my experience at McKinsey and Company, and now in talent acquisition, I hope to unlock the value of research for organizations. We use research for almost everything in the world. How many cups of coffee should I drink per day? How much should I exercise and when? What time should I go to bed? How many hours should I sleep? We use it for almost everything. Yet organizations who will spend hundreds of millions of dollars on consultants and data services to solve their toughest problems really do not make use of this research. I don't know why it is, but it's over 100 years of research and it's just not utilized effectively. And I hope for this channel to be sort of the beginning of unlocking that value. And I hate to self-promote, but you'll see in the description below my Forbes page where I write a lot about research. I try to sort of do this on a smaller scale. Each article I sort of talk about one particular journal article that can be helpful for organizations, but we don't always have time to read my long form writing. So I hope that this channel brings in more viewers and brings in more interest towards how can organizations be better places, right, for people? How can people be happier at work and more productive and just generally more satisfied and say, I actually enjoy going to work versus dreading each day I have to go in and just waiting for the weekend to come. So each week, what I hope to do here is talk about a different organizational topic. Sometimes it'll focus on a broader topic. Other times it'll focus on a specific paper. But I'll either answer a question that a viewer has sent me, one that I've heard before many times, or one that I've just come across over and over in my times working in consulting or just generally in the talent space. And I figure what better place to start than conflict. Conflict is inherent in organizations. We see it everywhere. I unfortunately have never been taking the subway home after work or never been on an after work run and heard people saying, you know what, today was a great day. That project I've been working on for the past 3 months, it's actually under budget and right on timeline. Everyone's working together so smoothly. We're gelling incredibly well. I've really never experienced something so positive. I've never heard that before. What I have heard though is, you know what? I can't stand my boss. He's one of the worst people I've ever known. I don't even know how he has a job, much less is managing other people, right? He ruins everything. All the good ideas we have, he scraps them and then he inserts his bad ideas and just really destroying the project. And I don't like work because of this and I want to try to find another job. That's one of the unfortunate realities of work, is that conflict is going to be everywhere. Even if I like some of my colleagues, organizations can be large places. I'm not going to like all of them. So conflict is really everywhere. But the question is, conflict seems like a bad thing, right? But is it always bad? That's where the research can be helpful here, because conflict, as much as it seems like it, is not a unitary construct. There's actually several dimensions of conflict. So the 3 dimensions we find most often in the research are relationship conflict, task conflict, and process conflict. And so starting with relationship conflict, that's sort of the one we tend to think of when we're thinking of conflict. It's the emotional or affective conflict where I just really don't like that person. They give me a bad feeling. If I knew them outside of work, we just wouldn't really be friends. And that's sort of generally harmful to teams, as we'd expect. And like I said, the kind of conflict we tend to think of when we hear the word conflict. However, there are 2 other types of conflict: task conflict and process conflict. So both of them are seen to be generally beneficial in small doses. So task conflict is actually that conflict where we're deciding what's the appropriate solution. right? We have 5 people in the room, everyone has their own ideas of how to solve this. And that is kind of beneficial to have everyone air their ideas, and with that comes a little bit of conflict. Because that's really, in the end, that's the reason we have teams. That's the reason we have organizations, is so that we can get the best of collaboration and the best ideas from a bunch of people and gel that into a solution that would be better than any one person could come up with on their own. So task conflict, sort of in the literature, is generally seen as a positive thing, in moderate doses, of course. And lastly, process conflict. This is the how things get done. This is the delegation. This is who has responsibility for what. This is who's going to make the PowerPoint deck versus who is going to present it, right? Again, very crucial, because coordination is necessary when you're working on even a team of 3, but much less a team of 10 or a 100-person virtual team. And so now that we're familiar with the 3 types of conflict, the next logical question is, when are these beneficial throughout a group's life? You know, is one better at the beginning versus the end? Is one better in the middle? So fortunately, Karen Jen, one of the most famous conflict researchers, along with her colleague Elizabeth Mannix in 2001, tackled exactly this question. And so what they did is they looked at 51 different 3-person teams. These were part-time MBA students, presumably at the schools they were teaching at the time. And the group project throughout the semester was to actually consult in an organization, to go into an organization that had a real problem, go in as a 3-person team, try to understand the problem better, and then attempt to solve it. So it's cool because it's actually a sort of real life group project. It's not just a canned project for school, but it's really exactly what consultants are doing. So they looked at these teams over time, and what they actually did to measure the dynamics of conflict is they, at 3 different points in the group, they asked about the relationship conflict, task conflict, and process conflict. This was at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the project. And then what they were doing is they were trying to relate patterns of these conflict over time to the group's eventual performance. So the high-performing groups, they found a number of things that are pretty interesting about conflict. So let's start with the simplest, relationship conflict. It's generally bad, right? We don't want high levels of it. We want pretty low levels of it over time. And so that's what they find, with a slight twist, as you'll see. There's actually a little bit of a jump in relationship conflict at the end. Not nearly as high as it is for the low performing groups, but there is a little bit of relationship conflict at the end for high performing teams. And I think what that is largely, at the end, there's, we're tying things together. We're putting the loose ends. We're assigning responsibilities. And a lot of times, even these beneficial forms of conflict, like task and process conflict, can sort of spill over into relationship conflict, especially if they get too high or they're prolonged over time. So I suspect that small jump is just the sort of natural, we're tying things together. This is less about likability now and more about execution, and a little bit of relationship conflict in that time is totally fine. So what about task conflict? So this is an interesting one. What they find is actually for high performing groups, task conflict in the middle of the project is what you want. At the beginning, you should really just be worried about sort of building trust and likability and cohesion with the team. At the end, we really shouldn't be thinking about the solution. We should already have the solution and just be executing on it. So it's really at the middle where you find that peak of task conflict. It's sort of this temporal landmark in some way, where we say at this point, right in the middle of this project, halfway through the semester, we should have a good solution. We should then just be focused on execution for the rest of it. But everyone's ideas should be out on the table, and we should feel, not only as individuals, comfortable that we have the best solution, but it really should be objectively the best solution that we could come up with as a group. So that task conflict, really it's beneficial if it peaks right in the middle and then starts to taper off towards the end. And lastly, process conflict. As I mentioned, so the authors hypothesize one thing and what they find is slightly different. So what they hypothesize is that process conflict at the beginning and the end is beneficial, right? At the beginning, assuming we're just getting together, we have to assign responsibilities and delegate a bit. So a little bit of process conflict there is expected and actually beneficial. And then of course at the end, when we're really, let's say, a week out from presenting our recommendations and writing our report, we'd expect to have a fair or moderate amount of process conflict to really get things done effectively. what they find is slightly different. They actually don't find the process conflict at the beginning for high-performing groups. And if you think about that, really, especially in a group project where we may not know each other, really the beginning for a high-performing group should just be building that cohesion, should just be getting to know one another, right? If you assign me something, I'll just say, okay, listen, maybe it's not my favorite, but I'm not going to ruffle feathers at the beginning. That's not going to lead to team cohesion and high group performance in the end. So really, it's only at the end that we'll see these sort of moderate amounts of process conflict as we're hitting close to the deadline, as we're deciding who does what. Maybe I present it, somebody else sort of synthesizes the recommendations in a PowerPoint deck. So overall, what did we learn? I hope this was helpful. We learned that conflict is not just one thing. There's actually different types of conflict. Some are more beneficial than others. Task and process conflict are far more beneficial than relationship conflict. And also the timing of conflict matters. Task conflict, you want that to peak in the middle of a group's project. You want to have the solution sort of decided on, everyone's viewpoints out on the table in the middle before you get to executing in the second half. In process conflict, that's fine if you have moderate amounts, and that's actually beneficial at the end when you're deciding on, hey, we're about to present either to the professor, maybe to the steerco if we're in a consulting company. We would want to have some moderate amount of process conflict there in order to make sure everyone knows what they're doing and responsibilities are assigned to everyone pretty objectively. So again, hope that was helpful. I will be back next week to answer more questions about organizations and bringing a research perspective with the ultimate goal of unlocking the value of research for organizations. Hope you all have a good week, and I'll see you next week. Bye.